I'm kind of happy with it. I mean, that's another 11 credits. I'm not doing it. He already just did it. He's so irritating. And it's going to be harder. How much harder? Yeah, I thought that one was hard. Wait,
That's for an extension.
Yeah.
At 30. I go, can I have an extension? 2 minutes later, he goes, yeah, I'll extend it tomorrow. 11 o'clock at night prior, he's going to be back.
He's so he just emailed me. I'm like, are you always out here?
Oh my God, I'm like waiting to hear what. People waiting to hear not like attending.
I've always wanted to see. Yeah, I told the answer key. You offered. Yeah, well, I want to take environmental, not photos. He just says,
We're both milestones, right? Literally like wakes up, looks at it, and just walks back out. I'm like, okay, I leave, she texts me at 10.
hold on, I'm gonna go blow my nose.
That is not a give me a kiss. No, that is not a give me a kiss.
You have to try one. It's actually really good.
No, I like it that way.
It is. This one's blue raspberry. There's lots of flavors.
And I think this is your start of your comics.
I really need to go to the lab.
I would be of the other.
No.
Okay, I can take Spanish.
I think that would be better.
That was like 4 laps.
That's when the first one comes on and it's how much do you guys record for?
So who's the opener? We gotta go somewhere.
I don't know. Because my sister's best friend.
Why?
I'm also the biggest fan of Marlon.
And I'm a as well.
Are you really? Are you so excited? Yeah, I was in the I only know one of his topics. I can know his entire well, my favorite song is regular. Oh my gosh, I think that we should just go to school. If we can really go to school, might go to both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing my entire top songs
Is he playing that song?
song. That's the only one I know. I listen to it.
Wait, how did it go? Wait, you sing that?
You probably know more songs.
Yeah, I know it's Girl on Fire from No Girl. So wait, can you sing Girl on Fire for me? You say Girl on Fire.
Like when I catch on fast.
Oh yeah.
Favorite thing is pretending like I know the song.
If you pass, or I did. If you were to, I play in the car so you can hear it.
Okay. That's like a lot of songs. You don't know what you and steady heart. Sure. This is really bad.
Is that really good? Maybe. I don't know names. What is that? Hold up. Wait, where's the let me pull the album out. I've been 5 years ago for like years. She's like, it's so good.
Alright guys, good morning. Settle down. Quiet down, please. Alright, I'm going to take attendance. Brianna. Bria. Henry. At the time. Anna. Here. Nick. Abby. Here. Hannah. Here. Rosa. Here. Matt. Here. Jillian. Mia. Annie. Brianna H. Here. Brandon. Sadie. Jessica. Here. Jesse. Here. William. Here. Marissa. Anna. Sophia. Here. Matthias. Here. Colin. Here. Olivia. Here. Braden. Amber. Here. Katie. Here. Ben. Here. Kennedy. Ava. Emily. Here. Lauren. Here. Jennifer. Here. Isabel. Sorry. Kendall. I know. Kendall. Yeah, I got you. Okay. Cool. All right, so we're going to continue today with the different types of microbiomes in our bodies, on our bodies. And so I want to walk through, we talked a little bit about the gut microbiome and antibiotics, but I want to kind of talk a little bit about all the different components of the gut microbiome. The gut, the gastrointestinal tract consists of the stomach, the small intestine. The small intestine actually consists of the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. And then you have cecum in mice. And then you have the colon, which is the large intestine, and then the rectum. So if you hear gastrointestinal tract, gastro means stomach, so gastric. That includes the stomach. If you just hear intestinal tract, that's referring to the small intestine, large intestine, and all the way down. So it doesn't include the stomach. So that's one of those small things that are used interchangeably, but they're actually not the same exact thing. So the upper GI tract obviously is the stomach, and then you have, your colon is in this gray, and then in purple you have the small intestine, which consists of the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. So the point here is to show you that there are different features of who can grow in these areas based on where you're at. So if you look at this right here in bacterial load, you see that bacterial load increases as you go down the GI tract. And so can anybody maybe tell me why you think that there would be less bacteria able to survive in the stomach versus the large intestine or the colon? Yeah, Laura.
Is it because of the stomach acid?
Yep. So pH is really important in this context. So the stomach is very acidic, and a lot of microbes will die as they enter the stomach, and so that's why we have more organisms that are able to inhabit the small and large intestine. Another thing that you guys should know is that as bacterial load increases, oxygen levels decrease. So the stomach is, in theory, closer to the upper respiratory tract, the airways, the lungs, so it's going to have more contact with oxygen levels. As you go down the intestinal tract, you have very limited levels of oxygen. So that's why I've been, saying that in the colon, that's where anaerobic bacteria are able to grow. So those are the bacteria that can't survive in oxygen if they're obligate anaerobes, so they cannot survive in oxygen. Facultative anaerobes are those that usually prefer no oxygen, but they can survive even with a little bit of oxygen, so it's facultative. So pH we talked about as well. You see, pH of the stomach is very acidic, so it's going to be lower, and then you increase as you go down. So I want you guys to know these. If I were to show you any of these arrows, you should be able to tell me what's what. And then lastly, a really important part of this environment is the mucus thickness and type. And so you'll notice that as you go down the GI tract, you're increasing the mucus amount. And so we'll talk about that. There's differences in the mucus layers in the small intestine and in the large intestine. Any questions so far? Okay, so in the small intestine, and this is a general image of whatever the, it doesn't tell us if it's the duodenum, jejunum, or ileum. We're just gonna say the small intestine. So we have our intestinal cells here. These are the cells, and then you see in green this thin mucus layer, and you'll notice obviously oxygen levels are highest over here, and then as you get into the lumen, it gets lower. So mucus, oxygen, and antimicrobial peptides, these peptides that are produced by microbes to help protect from foreign invaders, those help regulate the bacteria that can colonize and how they're organized in this area. This whole area is called the epithelium. One thing that is important is within these intestinal cells, you'll see different types of cells that are specialized, like Paneth cells, stem cells. So those are specialized types of epithelial cells that have specific roles. But one of the things that I want you guys to know is if you have certain cells that are important for the immune system, this is called a Peyer's patch, and basically this helps facilitate the immune sampling of the microbiome. So here we have a dendritic cell, it's an immune cell, and you can see that at the Peyer's patch, there's this streptococcus bacteria that's been, kind of trying to invade here, and so this is a good spot for the dendritic cell to, be able to sample what this is and figure out if it needs to fight it off or not. So a key difference between the small and the large intestine is that the large intestine has two mucus layers. It has a lot more mucus, and there's a dense inner mucus layer in the dark green, and then there's an outer mucus layer that, basically has a lot of bacteria, bacteriophage to help keep, remember, we have way more phage in us and on us than we have bacteria. So there's always phage that's going to be trying to keep the levels of the bacteria low as well. And so the inner mucus layer is more for protecting this epithelium. The outer mucus layer is where you have colonization of these bacteria, phage, and immune factors. So we have these defensins. These are things that are secreted by either the epithelial cells or by the bacteria that help protect and fight off, things that are trying to disturb this community. And so here, this is the lumen up here. Above the epithelial cells is the lumen. And so if there's, for instance, a food particle or something that is coming in, certain good microbes can attach to them and then stimulate the immune system to say, hey, this is something that shouldn't be here. In this case, it would be like a food particle that someone is allergic to, for example. Same goes for debris. The crypt is this area between the end of one epithelial cell and the end of another. So you'll notice that these cells aren't, straight horizontally. They have these loops up and down. And so same thing with the small intestine. So you'll see over here that this is a crypt. And so this would be a crypt in this area. So one thing you should know is that oxygen is just highest at this crypt, oxygen levels. Like I said, there are specialized epithelial cells. So they, will have different names. They're not just an epithelial cell. This one's a sentinel goblet cell. This one helps to make more mucus. And then there are also stem cells over here. Let's see, so it was shown in this one. Stem cells basically help to regenerate the epithelium, so those kind of replenish it. So these cells also, secrete things and try to make sure that you're maintaining that epithelial homeostasis. Questions so far? Okay, so all in all, the gut microbiome is an ecosystem and it's very, very highly complex. There are metabolites. Metabolites are things that are produced by the environment, by the bacteria. So those things are short chain fatty acids, which we talked about on Wednesday. They are very helpful in maintaining that healthy epithelium. Short chain fatty acids, if you remember, are really important in decreasing inflammation, help reduce obesity incidence, autoimmune disorders. The four that we talked about, can we name them? Well, what's one of them, the one that's mostly studied? Butyrate, yep. What's another one? There's butyrate, lactate, acetate, propionate. So you guys should know those four. Vitamins are also produced. It's very complex. And gut homeostasis is really critical for many body-wide functions. So one thing, I really want to, hone in is that the gut bacteria, they, are very important in influencing so many other things. So you'll see here satiety, so hunger, fat tissue, inflammation, atherosclerosis, more inflammation, fatty acid metabolism, insulin resistance, glucose intolerance, neuronal effects with the vagus nerve. So that is the nerve that basically connects the gut to the brain. And so we'll talk about the gut-brain axis as well. More inflammation, body weight, fat mass, improved gut barrier function. So the gut is really linked to all of these different things. And one thing that I always, try to drive home is that it's not just the bacteria that's influencing these things. The bacteria are also interacting with the immune system. So it's not just the microbiology, but it's the immunology as well that's happening down here that works hand in hand to keep this system working and healthy and influences the rest of our bodies. remember this part, dietary fibers leads to special, bacteria producing short-chain fatty acids, and that can then influence, other aspects of the immune system. Okay. So any questions on the gut microbiome, gastrointestinal tract before we move on? Okay, yeah?
Question, can you remind me again what the purpose of mucus is?
Yeah, absolutely. So mucus is basically a protective layer that helps to protect the epithelium and the epithelial cells. So if there's a foreign invader that's trying to come in, so if you see like this guy over here is trying to invade the epithelial cells, the mucus basically is like a glue, and so it helps to trap it, and it allows for other immune cells to come in and get rid of this. It also has other roles in, it's able to keep back healthy, good bacteria in this space to make sure that if there is an invader coming in, the bacteria can then defend against them. So it has a lot of protective roles to make sure that it doesn't disrupt this epithelial barrier. Because as soon as you get inside, across the epithelial barrier, you are touching basically the immune system. So this helps keep the immune system under control and in check. Yep, good question. Anything else? Okay. So the skin microbiome. Everybody's skin is very different, and it depends on, chemical composition and moisture content. So the three different microenvironments of skin are dry, moist, and sebaceous. And if you were to look at which bacteria colonize our skin, there are different, proportions of these bacteria based on the skin type. So sebaceous skin, we'll talk about what that means, has a lot of this propionic bacteria. This is actually one of the bacteria that causes acne. Moist skin has a lot more of corynebacteria. Dry skin has more of this beta proteobacteria. So there's, very similar types of bacteria that colonize different skin types, but their proportions are different depending on the microenvironment. So, the composition is influenced by many factors like genetics, obviously, but also, environmental factors, weather, age, personal hygiene, things like that. Okay. So microbes interact with the skin surface and structures. So over here, we're looking at skin cells. And so you have sweat glands, you have hair follicles, you have bacteria, viruses, and fungi that are all on the skin. And so, these bacteria are basically, there's a microbe epithelial crosstalk. So this crosstalk basically helps to prevent pathogen invasion, so that they produce antimicrobial peptides and other things to help protect against pathogen invasion. You'll notice that there's also a immune crosstalk. So these crosstalks are really important. There's immune cells underneath, the skin layers, the skin cells. And so, yeah, as you go up, obviously you increase oxygen. So when we're talking about, the different types of bacteria that can colonize these different habitats, would you assume that there are more aerobic or anaerobic bacteria that are going to colonize the skin? $50-50 shot, you can guess. Yeah.
You're on the skin, would it be aerobic?
Aerobic, yeah, because I'm breathing on my skin, oxygen. There's oxygen hitting my skin. So yeah, aerobic. It's, the colon is so deep inside our bodies that it's not getting access to oxygen, so that's why anaerobic bacteria can grow there. So just making sure you guys kind of think about those things for different types of questions. Okay. So we used to talk about microbes in the context of good or bad bacteria, but there is really no such thing. It's all about context. Okay, so in a synergistic host-microbe relationship where there's synergism, nobody's really, both are benefiting. The host provides nutrients while the microbes promote epithelial and immune homeostasis. They also resist pathogens through these products that they're producing and occupying that niche. So if you look at A, it's all about context. So it's all about this balance and how you tip the scale. So at, a mutualistic relationship where, they're both benefiting, your immune system is being educated essentially, and you're resisting pathogens, antimicrobial defenses are produced by the microbiota. But then if there's like a pathogen, it's a scale. So if the pathogen is basically breaching the epithelial barrier, then that can lead to inflammation, invasion, and pathogenesis. So in a pathogenic relationship, the microbe invades past the epithelium. So it breaches that epithelial barrier. It can cause inflammation, and sometimes it can also benefit from an inflammatory response. If the host is going through this inflammatory response because the bacteria has invaded, then that bacteria can also feed off of that response. So, there's obviously more work needed to determine how these different interactions happen, but we are definitely getting better and better at describing them. Okay, so that's the skin. Any questions on the skin? Okay, so in your mouth, in the oral cavity, there are different habitats that all present these different characteristics and are colonized by different subgroups of bacteria. So you have your tongue, saliva is its own habitat, your tonsils, your throat, your buccal mucosa, the inside of your cheek. You have the hard palate, the top of your throat, and then in your teeth you have, different types of plaque and gingiva. So there's so many different habitats, and they are colonized by different bacteria. So if you'll notice that Streptococcus is one of those that is bolded, and it's pretty prevalent in a lot of the different habitats. And so normally, it's kept at low levels, but for those who get recurrent strep infections, that's when you have, an imbalance and you have overgrowth of Streptococcus species that leads to strep throat. Okay, so this is a paper that also showed the same thing, that basically the microbial communities in the different areas of the mouth, in the teeth, the plaque, the buccal mucosa, and the tongue. They have different structures, obviously, but also different composition of microbes that colonize those surfaces. So, you know, these are just different ways to show this type of figure, and so I've just kind of zoomed into this one. So this is the tongue. You can see that there's so many different types of bacteria just based on the colors. And the inside of the mouth, the buccal mucosa, there's a lot of Streptococcus species. In the teeth, you have these Corynebacterium that are also present on the skin. They're just different species. So just to drive home this point. Okay, and so variation in how fast dental plaque grows, everybody's different, bacterial composition, and the host immune response, these are all things that are going to influence, you know, your teeth, your oral cavity health. And that can have effects for other parts of the body as well. So, let's see. Okay, so here we are looking at, if we look at E, we're looking at the different microbes, different species of microbes or genuses of microbes that basically are their abundance levels in high plaque communities, slow, and then low. So basically you can see that they're pretty similar, you know, among all of these treatment groups, and we're looking at this over time. And so, you know, there's different levels of these bacteria that are growing in these different plaque communities. And I don't want you guys to remember or know how to read these. These are just more for like your own information if you want to, you know, get an idea of some of these research papers and how things are tested in the lab to drive home these conclusions that we make. So all in all, the oral microbiome can impact the rest of the body as well. It's linked to Alzheimer's disease, cardiovascular disease, inflammatory bowel disorder, colorectal cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, pneumonias. Your oral health is really, really important. So these are all, you know, very short, brief, you know, I guess summaries of what we know about these different microbiomes. And so in the advanced microbiology class that I teach, we kind of dive a little bit deeper into these. We kind of focus on a certain microbiome and read papers about it and things like that. So just an FYI for future, I would teach that again. That's kind of what, where I get my topics from. Okay, any questions about the oral microbiome? Okay, now let's look at the lung microbiome. So the lung microbiome, showed you this figure before, has obviously different proportions of microbes and so these are just phyla of microbes, and so there's different compositions. You see it's kind of similar to the gut, but these are just phyla. Phyla, we're not really getting too much information from that. But years and years and years ago, it was thought that the lung was free from bacteria completely, but that's not true. The lung actually does have bacteria. And so much of what we know about the lung microbiome is actually the result of these researchers at the University of Michigan. This guy, Gary Hufnagel, is who I studied or did my PhD under. John works with us, Bob hooded me at commencement, so I work with these people really closely. And so our lab is a lung microbiome lab, but I studied the gut, so we kind of all we all in the lab kind of study different things, different components of different microbiomes, and it can all be linked to the lung. I literally presented my work to food allergy, people and conferences, and I don't even study food allergy, but there's relations between the gut microbiota's health and how that can predispose you to allergies and lung issues as well. So there's a lot of interconnectedness. I'm really lucky to have been trained by these people. But the lung, basically consists of this upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract. So there's differences. If you get an upper respiratory infection, you're going to have to take a different antibiotic than a lower respiratory tract infection. So the upper respiratory tract is sinuses, your nasal cavity, your pharynx, oral cavity, the larynx, and your lower respiratory tract consists of the trachea, bronchi or bronchial tubes, and your lungs. So some things to think about when you're looking at the different, areas of the lung microbiome is airflow. So obviously air is going to flow down, you inhale through the mouth and it goes down into your lungs. Temperature also is going to vary. Ambient temperature is going to be your normal temperature, but it's exposed to the external environment, and then your core temperature is going to be what the homeostatic temperature should be of your body. Normally that's about 98.6 or 7 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's important to consider that there's this bidirectional movement of mucus and inhaled substances, microbes. So you're constantly coming in contact with microbes in the air and you're inhaling them, and there's this bidirectional movement. Especially when you cough, for instance, that's things going back out of your mouth because it's disturbed your respiratory tract. Questions? Okay, the lung is not the GI tract, obviously, but what the point here is that there's different rules that we play by. So, yeah, there are mucosal surfaces, but it's very different. You have these bronchioles or tiny airways, alveoli over here are air sacs of the lung that permit gas exchange, so oxygen and carbon dioxide. And so the actual, the mucosal surfaces are on the outside, as you can see here, but inside, if you were to take a cross section of this, this is not a mucus layer. It's covered by lipids. So just to keep in mind that, there's really so much that's happening, and the main thing here is in these alveoli, you have this airflow of oxygen going in, carbon dioxide coming out. So I really just want you guys to know what the alveoli do. And so the other point that I want to make here is when we talked about the GI tract, we talked about how more diversity nurtures resilience, right? So if you have more diverse, microbes, then that means you have a healthier microbiota. The lung is a little bit different, and that's why we thought for a long time that the lung was free of any bacteria, which isn't true. But a healthy lung actually has a low microbial biomass site, so you don't want to have too much bacteria there, so low microbial biomass. And so, it definitely has a diverse bacterial community, but it's gonna have a lower biomass. It's not gonna be, the lung has about 10 to the 3 to 10 to the 5 bacteria, so that's 1,000 to 100,000 bacteria, but the GI tract has like 10 to the 11 plus. So, and that's because the lung is aerobic. It's an external surface. You have very, immediate contact with air going down into your lungs. There's lower surface temperatures in the trachea and bronchi. The lower temperatures basically means it's a little bit maybe colder in theory. And so if you remember, microbes like a moist and warm environment to grow. So if there's lower temperatures, there's going to be less bacteria able to survive. There's this surfactant or this host-produced detergent in the alveoli that helps to kind of make sure that there aren't a lot of bacteria. It's kind of like a mucus layer essentially, but for the alveoli. And so there are also phagocytes or macrophages, which are immune cells that engulf bacteria and, try to kill the bacteria. It's a defense mechanism. And so we have these macrophages also kind of surveilling the area and making sure that there isn't, a lot of microbes colonizing that shouldn't be there. It's also ciliated. Cilia are like little hairs, and so basically if you were to inhale something that's an allergen and you cough, it's basically the cilia trying to get rid of it. So it helps to keep, things out. Same with sneezing. Okay, so this figure is showing cell and tissue collection methods. There's just different types of ways to sample the airway microbiome. You can have, someone induce sputum, so spit into something, and then you can also do it more invasively where you have a bronchoscopy required. There's, different types where one of them is a bronchoalveolar lavage, and the other is an endobronchial biopsy. So we're not going to get into that, but just know that there's different ways to sample the airway microbiome. And a biopsy means you're taking a sample out of the body, and you're able to then count for certain inflammatory cells and different things. So. So an ecological model for the lung bacterial microbiome during health and disease. This is just an FYI slide for you guys. Just different things that impact the growth conditions of those microbes, going from health to severe lung disease. There's a lot of different things that can impact that, but I'm just going to throw this if you guys are interested. Okay, and so there are a lot of microbes that are implicated in airway disease. So in a healthy lung, you have low microbial diversity. And in a diseased lung, you have high microbial diversity. Remember, this is the opposite of what you would want to see in the GI tract. So asthma, cystic fibrosis, pulmonary fibrosis, other, things can be impacted when you have high microbial diversity. And like I've said, in addition to the airway, microbes in the gut have also been linked to asthma. We see these in both children and adults. So that's a little bit of where my research came in, where basically having Candida albicans infection or overgrowth in the gut leads to susceptibility to asthma and allergies in the lung. Okay, so this is kind of just putting it all together. You don't have to memorize the microbes in any of these regions, but just to kind of, go through and look at this as a summary of everything that we talked about. And yeah, next time we'll focus on the vaginal microbiome, the gut-brain axis, and we'll be done with the material for this unit on Monday.
You too, thank you.